Good evening and welcome to the Village of Tuckahoe Planning Board. Nancy, please take attendance.
Commissioner Niren. Present. Commissioner Barra.
Present.
Commissioner Forgione.
Present.
Commissioner Castellano.
Present.
Chairman Leo.
Present. On this evening's agenda, we have three items. One Scarsdale Road, which is returned. Actually, it's been postponed, adjourned. 21 Columbus Avenue, new daycare center, and 10 Fisher Avenue, site plan review. At this point, can we call up 21 Columbus Avenue, please?
I thought you were going to do the other one.
Yeah. Let it go.
Fisher?
Second? I'm sorry, daycare. Let me do that first, yeah. Sorry.
Good evening. Oh, that's loud. Good evening. Noel Wolfson, Hockerman, Tortorella, and Weckstein were counsel for the learning experience. This is an application. The applicant made an application to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special use permit to develop a learning experience daycare center at 21 Columbus Avenue. The matter was referred to your board for a parking recommendation because there's no set parking amount in the code. It's been before your board for a couple of meetings, and we've discussed various aspects of the project. I'm going to ask Matthew Jarmel of Jarmel Keisel Architects, our project architect, to come up and explain a couple of additional measures that the applicant can provide to address parking concerns. And then we'd like to ask your board to make a positive recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals this evening to grant the special permit for the daycare center. Okay. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matthew unless you have a question.
Nope.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening.
Welcome back.
I'm Matthew Jarmel. Let me start by thanking the board. You've been kind enough to meet with us several times, at least once publicly and several times in working sessions where we've discussed your concerns and ideas about how to handle drop-off pickup, employee parking, and I think that there are a lot of good ideas that have been floated around, and what I'd like to do tonight is kind of offer on the record four things that we've spoken about, which hopefully will address all the concerns. One of the things that I think that we were hopefully successful, and we have Mr. Seckler from Stonefield Engineering here tonight if we need some additional traffic information on the reports that his firm has done and his colleague Andrew had presented to you in the past, but I think we were fairly successful in showing that there was ability to park both parents and staff in the current supply. There were recommendations made by both our traffic engineer and the village's traffic engineer to add more parking spaces along Columbus, which, much to my surprise, have already been installed. I think they were installed last week, and I think that's a net of an additional 11 spaces. And there were suggestions on terms of how to adjust the meters so that there's more long-term parking spaces that could be as much as 4, 6, and 12 hours, as well as to creating 6 10-minute parking spaces on both sides of the road. So I think some of these measures have already started to be implemented by the village because they not only would help our proposed use, but help some of the existing merchants and uses in the area. So we were excited to see that that had already started to be implemented. So some of the things we talked about was purchasing parking permits, and we've had discussions with our tenant and our client and with the village, and they're prepared to commit to purchasing a minimum of 5 parking permits, either directly from the village or privately as they become available, as a means to assign them to staff. We had previously discussed that there are ability to park 3 cars on site, which would basically allow for a total of 8 spots that we would control, or the tenant would control, and that our traffic consultants had previously testified that there'd be a need for about 14. So we're taking up a little bit more than half of the parking requirement. There were some concerns about the existing crosswalk that crosses in front of the building, and some suggestions that I think may have come out of the police department, where one, they've asked that the existing crosswalks be, I'll say, reconditioned, repainted, with intermediate paint so that they show up and they're brighter, and we're certainly prepared to do that. But in addition to that, it was suggested that pedestrian crossing signs be installed on either side of the crosswalk. And we're prepared to commit to installing two such signs, one in each direction. They'd be solar powered, and we can submit to your board professionals for review, but the signs basically would also have bollards installed in front of them. The bollards would have sensors. So if a pedestrian, be it a parent coming to the child care center or anyone kind of crossing the street, walks in front of the bollard, the lights would go into a flashing mode and they'd be more visible for vehicle traffic to see and slow down. There's the crosswalk that's directly in front of the building now would get repainted and get two of those signs, and I believe there's a second crosswalk that we were asked to recondition without the signs, and we'd be willing to do that as well. So that was the second measure. The third measure, which we talked about in terms of how the drop-off and pickup procedure would work, is that the proposed plan creates 10-minute parking spaces on both sides of the road. These could be used by both our patrons as well as patrons to other facilities in the area. I think it might help. In fact, the child care center that's located in this building that has some issues with drop-off and pickup as well. These would be signed as 10-minute only spots, and we would put in a procedure into the parent contracts, or the learning experience would put into a procedure in the parent contracts advising them that these are the preferred spaces to use for drop-off and pickup. And we would install video cameras on the front of the building so that they can monitor this. So the parents would be discouraged in their literature that they get from the learning experience to double park, and they would be told that they're being, watched under video surveillance, and they would be spoken to if there's a problem, if you have a parent that has an ongoing parent. I do want to point out, and I'm sure you're probably aware, but I just want to kind of emphasize that these parking spaces alone wouldn't necessarily be the only drop-off pickup spaces, because there are also 2-hour spaces, 4-hour spaces. Just because it's a 2-hour space doesn't mean you have to buy 2 hours of parking. And I believe your meters in town will take a nickel, 10 cents, and a quarter gets you up, I think, up to a 15-minute spot. So it's very possible a parent would drop a nickel or a dime or a quarter in to run their child into if all the pickup and drop-off spaces were being utilized. So that was the third measure that we're going to commit to. And then the fourth measure was something that you raised the concern that you're having trouble in the village, whereby employees that work in the downtown area, and sometimes maybe even commuters, are parking in your residential areas where there are no meters. We think that it's probably a bigger village issue that probably requires some legislation on the part of the village to restrict parking in those areas for a certain time limit. But what we can agree to do is set a policy with our employees to discourage them from parking in those areas, write this into the operations manual for the staff, and basically work with the town that if you find that the employees from the learning experience are abusing that ability in parking in the inappropriate location in front of residences, that they would be reprimanded and potentially terminated if it was happening on an ongoing basis. So those four measures, we think, will go a long way in addressing the board's questions and concerns about both operations, where staff parks, crossing of the street in terms of pedestrian safety, as well as the drop-off and pickup procedures for the parents. And be pleased to address any questions you might have of me of those.
I think it's, I think these recommendations are all good, but I still am concerned about the, you may want to consider also potentially subsidizing some of the employee parking. Like you said, I mean, you're going to put it as a policy that, people can't park in residential areas, but again, as we spoke in the workshop, these are not, it's potentially anywhere between $8 to $10 a day if you're working an 8-hour shift, and these are not, I'm not sure what the salary range for these employees are, but it's a big, you're looking at a week, you're looking anywhere between $50 to $60, just for parking. And I'm not sure, if a lot of people can afford that.
So, and I appreciate the concern. I'm not in a position to make that commitment on behalf of the tenant, but I would like to just kind of emphasize that there will be about 8 spaces available, because there's going to be 5 permit and 3 on site. Their anticipated requirement is 14 spaces. Not, most of the staff works hourly, so we have 8 spaces for people that work all day. The balance of the staff are going to be hourly employees that are going to kind of come and go as the occupancy or of the building increases and decreases throughout the day.
Right.
So we do feel that we won't see a tremendous need to actually use the metered parking. We're also, you know, one of the reasons that the learning experience wants to be in your village is you're a great transit hub. You have both bus service, you have the county bus service, which services and stops at the train station, which is literally 450 feet away from the front door of this facility, and you have the train. And it's very possible that they may get staff coming up from the city or from the Bronx to work here and using the rail or the bus line as well. So we're pretty confident that it's going to work out.
Right. We're also pretty sensitive to the issues that we currently have in the community, and we received a lot of feedback from community residents that this is a problem in their neighborhoods. I think some of the board members have expressed as that as well to you, because they live in those areas where they do have issues parking in front of their homes. So, again, we don't want any additional vehicles that go into the residential areas are just going to exacerbate the problems that we currently have. So,
Understood.
yeah.
And we would work, with the community and police department. I don't believe there's any legislation in place that prevents someone from parking there all day long. And unfortunately, I don't think that's beyond our ability to do. It may even be, although I'm sure that the planning board can make recommendation to the village elected officials about putting some legislation in place that maybe restricts parking during the day to several hours, or maybe even permit parking. But what we can commit to is if you see the same car parking there every day, and you identify that it's one of our employees, they'll be discussed. And
I know, but that you're shifting the burden on the village to kind of police your workforce, which is I'm not sure we have the staffing to do that, or technology in place to actually identify who's who, and so yes, conceptually it's an idea, but unfortunately we don't have the mechanism in place to do all of this. So again, that's still been our concern. I think we've expressed that to you at many work sessions. But then I also looked at the zoning board meeting that you had Wednesday, and some other issues had come up there as well, which I want to make sure somehow we're addressing. I think some of the commissioners indicated that you're going to attract customers from a wide range of locations, and not necessarily just Eastchester, Tuckahoe, Bronxville. I think your circle of customers is probably going to expand that further. So you're bringing additional people into the community. So, and I guess one of the concerns was, hey, potentially a small portion of those commuters may, because of proximity of your location to the two train stations, they may say, hey, this is advantageous to me. I could drop off my child in the morning, park someplace for argument's sake, and go to work, and then come back in the evening, pick up my child, and go home. It's very convenient, but the issue is we don't have any parking spaces to offer these people. As you all know, that we have very limited parking spaces. So again, I'm not sure what percentage of that of those people will come into the village. However, because I think you're attracting from a wider radius, that has some potential validity to it.
We have our traffic engineer here, if you'd
Sure.
like him to talk and comment about that, because where we do recognize it could happen, we don't actually see it as really happening. We think that most of the people that are going to use this facility are already here, either in Tuckahoe, living, or already using the transportation artery of the train here, or are coming here to work. So, maybe
But also keep in mind, we do have another facility upstairs that is a childcare. So I think they've probably attracted all the local children. I'm not saying that you're not going to attract any local children, but I just think your radius is going to be further out versus I think theirs. So,
let me, if
sure.
you would, let me have Mr.
Oh, by all means. I mean,
Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. My name is Matthew Seckler from Stonefield Engineering and Design. We were the engineers that prepared the traffic studies and parking memorandums and studies for this application. Just to kind of address the chairman's comments, one thing I want to remind everyone here is that as part of the restriping plan or the new parking plan, we are adding 14 longer-term parking spaces to the overall village area. So again, not that I would think that additional people would come, and I'll speak to that comment later on. But we are increasing the overall parking supply, at least within our area, by over 10% for the longer term parking. Again, I think that is something that is being done by the village today or ongoing that'll help alleviate some of the issues with supply that you have right now in the village. Secondly, when we've done the studies for daycare such as this one, we typically see that most people either pick a daycare center that's within 5 minutes of where they work or 5 minutes of where they live, because they want to be able to either pick their child up when they get very close to home or right when they are at work. Maybe they work till 6 o'clock at night, so they need to have a place where they could pick up, a lot of daycare centers close around 6:30. They want to be able to pick up someone right near work, or vice versa. They drop them off before they get on the train and they continue on their way. So what we, again, typically see is your radius is around a 5-minute drive. I would say it would be unusual. Again, I can't say it's impossible, but it'd be unusual for, in the studies that we've done, to see someone come, let's say 15 minutes out of their way to utilize a daycare center and then continue on their commute. Again, not saying it's not done, not saying it's impossible, but it's been pretty atypical from what we studied. And if that does happen, if there is, let's say 2 parents that decide instead of going to the Scarsdale train station, they're going to come down and drop their child off. Again, we are adding the 14 parking, or the village is adding those 14 parking spaces for long term, which would help alleviate that potential, I would say, unrealized demand that may occur as part of this application. So again, if there was no additional parking spaces being added as part of this, again, I don't want to say it's as part of this project, but as part of the village's plan, I would say that I would have a little bit more concern. But those 14 parking spaces, I think, are somewhat meant to offset any, I would say, unforeseen demand generated by this site.
Do you have that revised plan from last work session showing those spots?
I have some boards. I believe it's revised. So
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
while he's doing the boards, just to let the public know, what happens here, this is kind of a informal, well, it's a formal application. This board cannot open the public hearing yet because you don't have a completed application.
Right.
Because to get a completed application, you need the zoning board's approval. They are before the zoning board now, and there is a public hearing open there. So if you decide to let the public speak, it's not really officially part of the record. So if they want to make it a part of the record, they'll need to come back to this board when this is before this board again, and the public hearing's open.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
And so I believe this is the exhibit that board member was referring to. Again, on top is existing designations. On the bottom is proposed. Green is those long 12-hour parking spaces. So you could see just visually from where you're sitting, there are a few of those spaces now, about 6 of them on the eastern side, or the eastern area from the site on Columbus. The restriping creates 14 of those parking spaces along that stretch. In addition, some additional 4-hour spaces located in front of the Benjamin Moore, but across the street from there. And then what we show on here is also in the orange color, the proposed 10-minute parking spaces, located 3 on the north side and 3 on the south side of Columbus Avenue. So that is the proposed long-term parking plan, or the change of regulations to the parking plan. I believe your engineer may have a comment.
Yeah, if I could just add, since our last meeting, we had some discussions, and I think it was determined that there was a need for more than 6 4-hour spaces. We had subsequent conversations with the police chief, and he agreed that 10 spaces, 10 4-hour spaces was okay. So that would basically add, take away 4 of those new long-term spaces. So 10 4-hour spaces, and then I don't remember what the balance for the 12-hour spaces would be. And then also for those short-term spaces, it was determined that 15 minutes was a better time, so that throughout the rest of the day, they would be a little bit more viable as spaces, especially as those are prime spaces. There's a deli, right across the street, so 15 minutes is more time to stop and get a sandwich or, do kind of daily drop-offs.
Yeah, this, sandwich, smoothie, basically,
Right.
I believe a 10-minute spaces provides a lot of that kind of quick serve utilization.
Right.
So again, I don't see it just for our use. Our use benefits, especially in those early, the morning hours when the retail isn't, really quite up
Right.
to speed yet. But when you're talking about in middle of the day, lunchtime periods, I think those will be widely utilized.
Right, and I think that just while I'm at it, I think the concern, just to reiterate the chair's point, that there wasn't a concern about the number of spaces, assuming the employees used the on-street spaces. There was just a concern about enforcement of that. So that was really, it wasn't about the number; it was more about the enforcement.
Understood.
And then just also responding to what the attorney mentioned earlier was that, people would be coming from, transit and other places. We just wanted to acknowledge that the study does provide a reduction in the parking demand that is recommended by the traffic engineers, the TLE numbers. We agreed that a 27% reduction was appropriate given the location and that a lot of employees and people would be using mass transit. So that's already been factored into the parking discount. And I believe 19 spaces was the final number that
19 spaces.
19 spaces. Yeah.
And again, that 19 spaces is a peak demand. Typically during the morning and evening time periods, that's more on the parent pickup and drop off. In middle of the day is when you typically would have your employee at your peak. So basically, beginning of the day, a lot of more parent drop off, low employees. Then as the students get dropped off, the employee number starts to rise, and then the employees numbers start to wean off as you get closer to the pickup hour.
But can I ask a question? Don't you have to have your employees in place to receive all these kids?
Yes, there are employees in place, and again, Matt could also speak to in terms of the operations, but essentially, they reach their peak employee usage when you get to your highest amount of children on the site. So at, I'm going to say 6:30 in the morning, you may only have 1 or 2 employees on the site. 7 o'clock, you may have 3 or 4, and then basically it ramps up. So when you get to that 9, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock hour, when you have your full amount of children on the site, that's when you have the highest number of employees, but your also drop-offs are less frequent. So at 9 o'clock, you may only be getting 2 parents dropping off at a time, but your employee number may be getting close to their peak. So again, your number of parent drop-offs may be 2, your employee may be 10, so you'd have 12 parking demand at that time period. In the early hours, you may have 6 parents all dropping off at one time. You may only have 2 or 3 employees on site basically receiving them because you only have a dozen or so kids inside the building.
And what's the ratio from employee to children? I know it varies by age,
Yeah,
but
it varies by age. I think Matt may be able to speak to that better.
and how do you manage that? How do you know who's coming in at what time?
I'll let Matt answer that one
Sure.
since he works more on that operation aspect.
So at peak, it's 19 spaces, not 14 spaces.
At peak, it is the peak amount of employees you would have would be 14 spaces. There's obviously a time period where there may be some employees parked at their peak and some.
What is the maximum number of people on site at any one the maximum number of people on site? Let's say, I don't know, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock.
Peak or park cars, because
Employees. I want to know employees.
employees, the peak amount of employees is 20.
So, you asked a few questions there. So this center, just to kind of buy the numbers.
Sure.
Sorry. If it's approved, it
Mhm.
has the potential to be licensed by the state for 174 children.
Right.
And that would, 174 children, and that would require 29 staff. Okay, so on a ratio basis, it's probably 6-to-1 approximately, and it varies. The younger children need more, older children need less. Within that number, there is a room that's called Make Believe Boulevard, which is an indoor play area that gets licensed because it's used, but it's not used as a classroom. So that's 24 people. So it drops the occupancy down to about 150 if they were at full occupancy. And that would drop, if you take that room out, because it has 24 people in it, it's three staff. So the maximum staff, if this center was full, would be about approximately 26. And, well, not approximately, it would have to be 26.
26.
26.
Right.
And as Mr. Seckler was, and typically, and I think I had said this to the board in the workshop session, I'll say it again, but typically, the goal is to get to about 85%. If they could fill it to 100%, they'd be ecstatic.
Sure.
These centers typically operate at about 85%. And part of the reason is one, they need to actually keep spaces available for children as they're aging and maturing and move them from one environment to the next. And the example I'll remind you that I use is have a room full of children that are crawling, one stands up, that walking child needs to go to another room, as an example. And Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. You can't open a center without teachers there to receive. So when they open, they'll open with 2 people, and they start to fill a room. They'll put all children of all ages in one room. And
So
as
infants, toddlers.
well, infants will go, they'll categorize them into like smaller groups of children.
Right.
So there'll probably be someone running an infant room and then someone running a toddler room that might also have a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. And what happens is they don't know this day one, because actually it takes them several months to actually fill the center or get to the place. Sometimes it could take up to a year. Right. But once they're up and operating, they kind of get into a lack of a better word, a groove. They understand their needs, and they adjust their staff accordingly. And sometimes they have half-day programs, 3/4 day, full day. People don't necessarily need them all day. So they sometimes find that children may start leaving at noon or 3 o'clock. Every center operates a little bit different, but once it's up and it changes over time because children age out. But once they're up, it stays pretty consistent for several years as the children kind of work their way through being it. Hopefully they start as an infant and go until they go into the public school,
Right.
or private school, kindergarten classes.
Okay, so let's use an example, right? So it's 7 o'clock in the morning, okay? How many employees would you assume would be on site, or how many employees would be on site?
At 7 in the morning, I would say there would probably be about 4.
4 employees. And how many children would be received at that time, roughly? Because there's got to be a ratio. In other words, the state's got to require that.
Excuse me. So we have some data
Yeah.
on how they arrive at operating centers, which I'll ask Mr. Seckler to share with you.
Sure.
So this is a bit based on arrival.
And what is this based on, by the way? What is this data from?
So we've collected and counted the basically arrival times and 15-minute intervals as people arrive into the learning experience sites.
So this is all your
Basically-
sites. This is your sites.
Existing sites.
Okay.
You know, so what we've typically seen is that. Get the right page here. Okay. So this is again general outline. Between 6:30 and 7, you may have about 11 children being dropped off. Between 7 and 7:30, about 28. Between 7:30 and 8, about 43. Between 8 and 8:30, about 43. Again, just to emphasize the fact that a large number, and I seem to be anywhere between, 12, 15% are siblings. So again, just because one child is being, I'm saying child being dropped off, it may be one car with 2 children in it or
Right.
3 children of that nature. Then by 8:30 to 9, I'm going to say 29, and 9 to 9:30, 29. Again, this was based on a site that had maybe a little bit more, about 183 was the capacity, but that was the drop-off during those kind of peak time periods. I did give you 30-minute intervals.
Yep.
Again, with the typical drop-off time period is anywhere between 5-6 minutes. So again, it's not 28 children being dropped off the same 5 minutes. It's somewhat random, but we typically see a max of about 6 parents dropping off at one time is what we've seen during the sites in operation.
Okay, so at 8:30 in the morning, you have approximately 125 children on site, based on the data you just gave me.
Based on a site working at about full capacity. level.
Yeah, correct. Listen, we're assuming you're going to be at full capacity very soon. I mean, that's our assumption. So you're going to have 125 people, 125 children on site. That requires how many adults supervision?
Again, it depends on the age groups, but probably 20.
20. So basically by 8:30, I need to have 20 staff on site, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so now we have 20 cars, or whatever the ratio is, 27%, take away 27%. You know, you're probably looking at what, three, so that's 14 cars at that point, right? Right, and then, but keep in mind, you got another 54 coming in an hour later. And you're not giving away, you're not, turning staff away at that point, right? So it's 14 cars, right? And then you got another 58 kids coming in. That's gonna require additional staff, and I think you said it's 1 to 6 or something like that, right?
And that's where we ramp up to basically that 19
Got it.
parking space.
Right. So is it, so it's 50, what is it, 58, 60, 60, so that's 10. No, if at 1 to 6, you're closer to 10 parking, 10 more staff.
And again,
If it's 1 to 6 and I got 58, I rounded up to 60 just for the easy math, right? So it's 6, it would be 10 more, 10 more staff, right?
Yeah, just, there's a little bit of a glitch in that the center that Mr. Seckler just read off has its capacity of 183.
And we're at capacity of 174, okay, it's 10 kids, 9 kids, okay, so
you're
it's,
knocking off a couple staff, basically.
okay, so I just want to, again, use simple math. You got 10 more people, you're using 27%, right? It's another 3 people knock off, so it's another 7. So at this point, I'm calculating 21 cars, right?
Assuming they're all driving.
We're taking 27% away,
Yeah.
all right? So it's 21 cars. So let's do the math. Let's go backwards. So we're purchasing our licenses, or no, I'm sorry, permits for 5 parking spaces. You have 3 which are going to be in your driveway, which is tandem, which is another story, whatever. So that's 8. If I take 8 away from 21, it's, what is it, 13. So we got 13 people we have to deal with, right?
Not all of which are, I would say, full-day employees.
I got that, but I got 13 cars I got to deal with. Yes, we've added cars along Columbus, which is with parking spaces, excuse me, along Columbus, and they're great. How many did we add altogether? 12, 13? What did we add?
I believe it was a net of 11.
11. Okay, so we've added 11, which I think we still have ample parking there, right? My concern is, again, and I've stated to you many times in our work sessions, is a good portion of these people will eventually go park inside the community in residential areas. I still feel that, yes, as much as you want to be able to, it's human nature. I mean, everyone's going to wants to save a few dollars. So I think fundamentally we really need to solve that problem, and I think we've gone back and forth multiple times on this. In my mind, that's the problem you really have to solve. I think everything else, you're doing a great job, and you solved a lot of these issues, but in my mind, this is still a big issue.
You don't think that a written policy and procedures for the staff?
Someone's got to monitor that. I mean, you're relying on us to do that. You're relying on our police department, our parking enforcement to do that. Now, all of a sudden, we got to figure out, okay, is it Jane Doe? Does she work for the TLC? I mean, it's policy is great, but enforcement's a different thing. You're relying on us to enforce it. I mean, we've talked about this multiple times. Again, that's the issue that needs to be solved. Everything else, I think you guys did a great job, and
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
you're kind of asking us to solve a community problem. And
I do not want to exacerbate. You're asking to move into a facility, which is great, and I think you guys you'll succeed there. But we have to deal with the consequences of you moving into our community. So we want to mitigate that as much as we can.
and I appreciate that, but
Yeah.
I do think we've given you considerable data. One, our use requires less parking than other uses that are allowed in the site, that you would have to challenge, or have the same issue. The retail zoning requirement for parking here far exceeds what we're here and demonstrating.
I know, but we've had that discussion regarding the retail.
And we have demonstrated that even before the spaces were added, with the help of your traffic consultants, that there was parking available. And in fact, we show that in the early mornings, there's more parking available to us.
I'm not questioning the availability of parking on Columbus. I'm not questioning that, you know. And by adding additional parking spaces, it's wonderful. I'm not questioning that. I'm just questioning human nature. We have to deal with potentially 13 people. They're going to be going into our community, and we're going to have residents coming in front of, you know, the village board and saying, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Why do you guys allow this?"
If I can interject, I just wanted to clarify the special use permit, and it's granted by the zoning board of appeals. I think they're looking for a recommendation from the planning board, but it does ask that they evaluate the quantity and the quality of parking so that it doesn't have an undue impact on the village. So it seems that it's within the planning board's right to discern whether or not, you know, the quality, whether it's being used appropriately. And seeing as there aren't off-street parking spaces on site and the village is providing spaces, it's within their jurisdiction to
So
see that those spaces are used
to
appropriately.
me, candidly, I think it's an easy solution. I just think that you need to have legislation in place that limits the parking in front of these homes during certain hours for certain timeframes. So if you, for example, said you're only allowed to park within these neighborhoods from, say, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. for 2 hours.
Yeah, no, typically we have those regulations in place, either 2 hours or 4 hours, and a lot of people who have the 4-hour parking in front of their homes are also complaining. They actually want to convert to 2 hours, and I think some of our commissioners, you know, live in those blocks, and they're the one petitioning the board to actually reduce the amount of time that people can park in the streets.
So I think that'd be great, because I think that would solve.
It's not going to solve all the problems. Your people still have to go someplace. I mean, yes, it's going to prevent people from parking there, but where are your people going to park?
So, you know, I had this discussion with the tenant. I said, when we went to them and asked about supplementing, and they said that they believe a lot of their staff will carpool, ride share, use public transportation. And they said that, you know, if they have difficulty hiring staff because there is no place to park, then they'll have to adjust their compensation for them, and they would do it at that time. But they believe that.
Yeah, but you're asking us to accept, you know, all these cars in our community, and then when it becomes a problem, we're going to have to deal with it. Unfortunately, I don't want to go down that road. I mean, everything else you've addressed our concerns from the facility, temp parking, but again, it's the employee parking. And again, I know because Andrus has had these issues. You know, we do have the data from, you know, and our attorney sees those employees come in front of him, you know, for parking tickets. I will give you an opportunity to speak. Just kidding.
All right, perhaps we could step aside, maybe hear from the public, and maybe give us an opportunity to just kind of talk about this amongst ourselves.
By all means, sure.
Come back shortly.
Yeah, of course. So hold on. So I just want to make it clear: this is not a public meeting. This is basically we're having a conversation this evening, and so by all means, please come up and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you live, and speak into the.
Actually, an attorney.
Hello.
My name's Adriana Kierzenbaum. I work, I'm an attorney at Dorff and Nelson,
Okay.
and I'm here representing Andrus.
Okay.
We have a couple of people from Andrus, and just say a little bit of the background of Andrus. Perhaps not everybody's familiar with their involvement in the community, if I may. Andrus has been operating here for 50 years, though in different locations. At first, they served 42 to 44 families and cared for 44 kids, ages 18 months to 5, at the previous location at 35 Bronx Street. And then after an electrical fire, they had to relocate to Father Fatah Hall at the Assumption Church, still serving 44 children. Both those locations had ample parking because the church had a parking lot, and at the other original location, it was in a residential area. However, for the last 8 years, they have offices. They have operated here out of Village Hall, and right now they're serving 85 families. Though they do have a permit to care for 187, which would be 133 infants, toddlers, and preschools, and 54 school-age kids. And the kids would be between the ages of 0 to 12. Currently, they have 96 children enrolled, And today, for purposes of offering information of a daycare center that is operating in the area and can give firsthand experience regarding the parking constraints, the complaints of the neighbors, I would like the opportunity to have Francis Clayton, who is the Director of Operations and Initiatives, to provide some information, if the board will allow it.
Sure.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I want to start off by
Just for the record, just give us your name and,
Francis Clayton,
uh-huh,
Director of Operations and Initiatives at Andrus Early Learning Center.
thank you.
I want to start by saying we welcome other businesses to the area, and we, as much as anyone, understand the important role that quality early childhood programming plays in a healthy community. That said, we have a responsibility to maintain a safe environment for our children regarding both safety during drop-off pickup and for staffing ratios. Our concern with the learning experience proposal is parking in several areas. While we know TLE has done research regarding parking and traffic patterns in the area, our hope is to provide some information based on our experience operating a similar program right here on the same block. The first is parking during drop-off and pickup regarding families. As you're aware, we've asked for a bit more time so we can provide a detailed information from our families. We have a parking survey and are gathering quite specific information on drop-off and pickup timing. I can tell you that this morning our busiest drop-off window was from 7:45 to 8:15, where we had 30 children dropped off. On 10/3, a random day I picked to check, we had 32 children dropped off between 8:15 and 8:45. During pickup, the peak time was 5:30 to 6, with 29 to 30 children picked up on average. This is with our current number of 96 children. It's important to remember that our number of children is lowest in the fall as we accept incoming students our year, growing to full capacity between June and July. That means that these numbers I'm sharing today are based on our lowest point of enrollment. In the memo dated 8/30 by BFJ Planning, they estimated needing 5 parking spaces for family drop-off. Just today, we had over 30 children dropped off in a 30-minute period. The second concern we have is parking for our staff. I've been a part of AELC for 4.5 years. Since I arrived, it has been no secret that we've had significant challenges regarding staff parking. I have some basic information to share on this. As mentioned, AELC has been in this community within walking distance of our current location here at Village Hall for 50 years. Much of that time, we had staff parking. Prior to moving to our current location, we were located just up the street at Father Fata Hall at the Assumption Church. When we first moved to Village Hall, the church allowed our staff to continue parking in their lot. Those circumstances changed about 4 years ago, and since then, parking for our staff members has been a significant challenge. We've presented to the village in the past few years, had a number of conversations with the previous mayor and village administrator David Burke. We currently have 38 staff for 96 children and have vacant staff positions. 5 of those vacant staff positions are for full-time staff. We have an additional several part-time openings. Our expectation is that at full capacity, we will need 40 staff members. Of these current 38 staff members, 36 are scheduled to work all 5 days of the week. 25 of these staff, or 69%, drive to work and park in the area. The bulk of these staff park on Wallace in either 4 or 2-hour parking, 48%. The next largest group, 28%, park in the Underhill lot, with most of those parking in 12-hour metered parking. The remaining 24% of staff park on Pleasant Place, Jefferson, and in 2 spaces here on site. You will notice that many of the spaces our staff park in are 2- and 4-hour slots. This presents its own safety and management challenge. This means that many of our staff must leave the center, thus leaving the classroom during their working shift. While some can move cars on their lunch break, the timing rarely lines up so perfectly. As adequate supervision is essential for the young children we serve, we require extra staff to provide coverage while other staff members deal with moving their cars. As parking is often a solid 5-minute walk away, this can take 15+ minutes per move. From the 8:30 memo from BFJ Planning, it is estimated that the TLE employee parking demand will be 14 spaces, and the spaces for parent caretaker drop-off may be as high as 5 during peak periods. If they have 29 staff, based on our staff percentages, they would have 20 staff driving and parking in the area. This is significantly higher than their estimated 14 spaces. Even with the 8 in their control, as they mentioned earlier, that would leave a minimum of 12 unaccounted for spots. We also believe that the estimate of 29 staff is very low for a center with an operating capacity of 174. You may recall we currently have 96 children and 38 staff. The TLE memorandum dated 8/30 states that staff will not have a significant difficulty finding a parking space as long as they're prepared to walk about 600 feet. Most of our staff currently park more than double that distance from the center. As for the proposal provided by TLE to increase longer-term parking, the solutions are creative and are much needed even without the introduction of TLE staff and families. It is important to know that these spaces not being reserved for TLE alone mean that our staff, TLE staff, as well as many commuters will have access to these places. Just this past week, I had a family who had been waiting for many months for their child to join our center turn down a spot because they could not find parking in the area. I expect many of these additional 12-hour spaces will be taken by families who drive to Tuckahoe, drop their children off at a daycare, and then jump on the train to commute to the city. We're responsible for the safety and well-being of the children and staff currently enrolled in the program operating here in Village Hall. We're in the process of gathering further information on the commuting as well as the geographic makeup of our families. And we look forward to the opportunity to present and share that information with the village.
Can I
Thank
ask
you.
you a couple questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you have 38 staff for 96 children.
Yes, sir.
Is that a requirement by New York State, or is that because this is the way you staff your facility?
So it is both. Primarily, it is a requirement by New York State. So for the youngest children, the infants, the ratio is 1 to 4. For the toddlers, the ratio is 1 to 5. It is not until the children hit 3 years old that the ratio jumps to 1 to 7.
1 to 7.
Now, that said, we have one of our toddler classrooms, we have 12 children that can be enrolled. That means we need 3 staff. So often your staffing ratio to meet the needs is higher than that required number.
All right. Okay. Would you? I know you're doing some research, but do you have a sense where your customers are coming from, your children are coming from, more or less?
Sure.
What kind of geographic area you're attracting from?
Bronxville, Eastchester, Tuckahoe, Scarsdale, Yonkers. So while we do have some within a 5-minute walk,
Right.
most are not.
Okay.
The information we're getting from families is how they get to the center,
Right.
how they leave the center at drop-off. So are you coming and bringing your car and then taking the train in?
Right.
Where they're parking when they need parking, and sort of what other challenges they're facing at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Where is your drop-off spot now? I know you mentioned some
That's not a
30.
building.
Sure. So we currently have on Underhill, there's a cutout that will
Right.
accept 3 to 4 cars. We're in the fortunate position of having 3 streets that have metered parking that our parents can drop off without having to cross a street. That said, families often get ticketed for parking in spots they shouldn't, to be really honest. And it is a constant weekly complaint we get from families that they arrive at the center, there's nowhere in our allotted parking to park. Many of them park in the Underhill lot. I will say that our staff, that they currently have to pay for it, would all love to have the 12-hour parking. If you don't arrive at the earlier shift, there's no 12-hour parking available. So it's my expectation that well before 9 o'clock in the morning, any 12-hour spots in the
gonna
area
be gone,
would
right?
be gone.
Right. So I'm also looking at, you had indicated earlier that, when the children actually come to your facility. So within, from 7:45 to 8:45, you're actually receiving approximately, if I wrote it down correctly, 67 children.
So approximately a third of our children.
Okay.
And these.
And you said I know
this.
the drop off is on the side of the building over here and behind the parking lot here. But since you're receiving 67 children, those 3 spaces, not going to, in our period, can't accommodate all those children at one time, right? So what's a typical, how long does it take for, if I'm a parent, I park on the side here, how long does it take for me to kind of give you my child, and how long does that transaction take?
So we're working on getting specifics. I will tell you that for us, it's far more than 5 minutes. I do think we have a little bit further to walk.
Right.
But it depends on the parent, quite honestly. It depends on the age of the child. So if you have an infant and you're dropping off diapers and going over the daily routine and telling them how the morning went,
Right.
that can take quite a while. If you're a parent of a 4-year-old who's fairly used to the program and comfortable, maybe it takes 7 to 8 minutes.
Did you receive at the steps, or did they come into the facility?
They come into the facility.
Okay. So that's a longer walk.
Yes.
Well, depending where you're coming from, right? So they're parking on those 3 spots on the side of the parking lot. Then also parking on Columbus as well.
Some probably park on Columbus, a lot park on Main. So
On Main Street, so they come to the front.
So we have both front
Right.
and back entrances. So
Okay.
we have entrances on Underhill and Main Street,
Okay.
which is a benefit to us and expedites our parking.
Right.
And it also means they're both of those streets, including the Underhill lot, that parents take advantage of.
Okay. And you could actually accommodate more, you said, and you just don't have the staffing for it.
So we are hiring for staff. The way our program works is we accept children all year. So as infants age up into the toddler program, we can
Right.
accept more infants. So we're at lowest capacity this time of year. We'll be at highest capacity in June or July, and we'll have
Okay.
can have up to 130 children at that point.
All right.
133
And your data tells you that 69% drive.
of our current
Of your
staff.
staff, right.
We have 69% drive. We have 19% that take public transportation, and then 12% that are either dropped off or walk. And we have no one of staff who are ride sharing or carpooling. And we also, at the moment, haven't had any families respond that they carpool. All the families are dropping off their own children. And we have a number of siblings, as many as we've had in a while, and that's 11%.
Siblings?
Is the number of families. So we currently have 96 children and 85 individual families.
Okay.
And that will increase on November 3rd by 3 or 4.
Chairman, if I can ask her a fast question. I know, listen, I look at your guys with your drop-offs and everything every day
Mike, speaking to the mic, please.
trying to get in. I see that you guys also, you have buses as well. I don't know if the chairman's aware of that, right? And so when a bus pulls up, it stops traffic in all directions.
Why are
So
buses?
we have a collaboration with a special education program. It's 12 children. They come on 2 buses. Our biggest challenge with parking has been this issue. So it only happens twice during the day. They used to park on Main Street because getting to Underhill in the traffic was quite complicated, and
Right.
also you have emergency vehicles there. The Main Street parking, we were told not to do that anymore, so now the buses drop off in Underhill. That is a very quick drop off. The staff meet the children at the bus, but it still, as you mentioned, causes a significant backup on
Okay.
Underhill and Columbus specifically.
All right. So when you get the additional data, if you could share it with us, it'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you
All
for
right.
that.
You have any questions? Hold on.
I would just want to know, do you have a sense of just timing for some of the data that you presented today, and with the survey, just give us a sense of when that will be ready?
Sure. So the survey for families is ready. It will go out tonight. We held to make sure there wasn't any other information you wanted us to gather from them. We will add the question about exactly where they're from, so we don't have to go through files and look that up exactly. I would imagine that we would have a large percentage of families reply within a week to 10 days. We're never going to get 100% of our families, but we can give you a pretty good estimate within that amount of time, I would imagine. We also can give you some more specific estimate about trailing averages of drop-off and pickup time and how many children that is, what days of the week, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, any data you could provide would be helpful.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank
so one more time, just your staff. So the number of staff that actually park on the street, let's say you said you had 38 staff, right? So I know
Yes.
you said you had 2 parking spaces in the lot here, and then so how many people
So
park?
we have 25 that drive,
Right.
and we only have 2 parking spaces in the lot, so that leaves 23.
So 23 are looking for parking spaces.
Yes. And this only includes the staff that drive most of the time. Sometimes you'll have someone who typically commutes. Our commuters, we find, are typically city residents, live in New York City and commute up. We don't get a ton of people who use the cross-county buses because of the length of time it takes to get here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to speak?
I just wanted to ask, in reviewing the information to represent my client, I was unclear as to which were the daycare centers that were used by the applicant to determine the numbers for staffing and for parking, because when I looked at the papers, it didn't say this center,
Right.
what location it was.
Sure.
And I thought that would be
Help,
useful.
yeah.
And if there's any other information that we can provide that would be useful, we would be glad to do so.
Right. Any information you can provide of your experiences within our village, that'd be, it's amazing that we have that, that we can get that information.
So there may be a hearing next month to
Oh, there will be a
allow us
hearing.
time to
Oh, yeah, no question.
provide
Yeah.
additional information.
We still have to go in front of the zoning board, the applicant still has to go in front of the zoning board and have to come back in front of us as well, so you have time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else want to say anything? All right, since, oh, come on back up.
I have a suggestion for your concern about staff parking in front of
Sure.
the residential areas. And of course, I have to sell this to the operator, but I think we could issue almost a decal for our staff to put in their car.
Okay,
So what that would mean is they would be obligated, if they want a job, to be able to put this decal in their car. So that if someone is parking in front of a residential home and it's one of our staff, it'll be easily denoted because there'll be a decal perhaps in the window, maybe something that hangs from the rearview mirror, and then the resident can call us and make a complaint directly.
okay, I mean,
That would
all right,
solve that issue.
I'm sorry?
Forcing the decal is going to be a little tough, but you could
Well,
certainly try.
It's an option, but I mean, you heard the experience that we have here.
If they want to continue to work for the operator, they would have to follow their rules.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Come on up, sir.
My name is Al Cower. We have the paint store right next to the proposed building. And I was here at the zoning board meeting the other night, and in 2.5 or 3 hours, or whatever it was, and I don't want to prolong this to that degree. However, just to bring this up briefly, and I had some points. We do have a fire department right there, right? The fire department needs access to Underhill Street or wherever they're going to go. If we have a daycare center on Columbus Avenue, which is pretty much close to Underhill Street, the fire department has to come down. They don't want to go, and again, someone else mentioned this the other day. They don't want to go up Main Street, come down, up Columbus Avenue to go around it because that's cut-off time. I think that's important to know the safety of these children that are going across. Also, I might be wrong about this, but I understand you have some spaces for allocated across the street from the building. That means if that's the case, the people have to take the kids out of the car, cross the street to bring a kid into the building, and the building, according to the other night, it takes children at least 5 minutes a minimum to get into the area. So you got 5 minutes there, but if you have 20 people lined up, that's an hour before you can get people loaded up, if you look at it from that viewpoint. Also, another viewpoint is in our business, we have the most cars come through our business is about from 7 to 10. So we have contractors coming in and out. As I mentioned the other day, we have 40-foot trailers coming in. All these, creates traffic. Now, this is on, Columbus Avenue is probably the second busiest street in the whole village of Tuckahoe. And this building is about 100 and some odd feet away from the busiest street, which is Main Street. We're asking for trouble. I mean, parents are parents, but parents are going to be dropping off kids. They're in a hurry. Things happen. I mentioned this the other night, briefly speaking, and even today I heard something where a woman was watching, she lost a 5-year-old kid today, right? Not at a daycare center, but she happened to be there, left her hand up, kid disappeared. They're still looking for that kid. The other night at the meeting, whenever that was, and I forgot what date it was, that same day, there was a child, a woman lost a child, a 4-year-old, and she had the police looking all over for this kid. And they found it in a daycare center, which she dropped off. That means, their minds are gone. And also, several weeks ago, there was a case where a father left the kids in the heat in a car and thought that he dropped off the health at the daycare center, and the kids died. I'm sure we've all heard that one. And as I said, there's another one that I saw several months ago where they took a car seat with the kid, put him on top of the car, and the father took off with the kid in the car. Okay? This is what happens. So if we're going to have the children and put them at risk, we still have to have some time to be able to do this, and you can't do it on a busy street. Without getting into the further stuff, I'll leave you alone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just for your information, we will be forwarding this application to the police department and the fire department to get their input as well.
Mr. Chair, it's already been done.
Thank you.
So the fire department picked it up the other day, and
Right.
we'll expect a response back from them.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, so at this point, yes, come on.
My name is Rocco Alessandro. I own the shopping mall on Main Street in Columbus Avenue.
Directly across the street from the new facility, the facility?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I see a problem every day, okay? This is a daycare center here in the building department. There's people dropping off right on the street.
On the hill?
On the hill, yes. The problem there also, there's delivery trucks parking on the I'm sorry,
It's okay. Take your time.
the sidewalks.
Okay.
That street is too small. I'm glad there is so much demand for parking, because you do have a parking lot. Hopefully someday, 100 years from now, they could put a parking garage, and we could help everybody, the businesses, and also
Sure.
the schools.
Yep.
One of the concerns is the street could be made bigger. Hopefully, we could find some money to do that, if it could happen.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So, anything else on the applicant? You have any questions? Ray, you have any questions? Hi.
Hi. So, at this point, I think we'd like to ask your board to hold the application over. And if we'll be getting information from the existing daycare center that's in Village Hall, we would like it in advance of the next meeting so that we can
As soon as we get it,
understand
we'll share with you.
because we have been pending for several months, so we would like to move it along. And I do think we have some distinguishing factors between their operations and ours.
Okay.
So that's how I think we'd like to proceed this evening.
Yeah, as soon as we receive the information, the building department they'll send it off. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you. One more?
Would we be able to likewise?
Come to the,
Would we likewise be able to get information we requested regarding the centers that they use to come up with 26 parking spots?
yeah, I think it's
Everything?
whatever they
The name
submit,
of it?
yes. Can you provide that?
The name of the suburban centers that you used to come up with 26 that then got reduced to 19?
I
So we
mean-
can see whether there are any distinguishing features or not. and
I think the gentleman behind you wants to say something.
So it was based on parking demand at 5 sites that were studied. I could give you the town location. I don't have the specific address to each one of them, but they were the learning experience sites in Ramsey, New Jersey, Cedar Grove, New Jersey, Parsippany, New Jersey, Union, New Jersey, and Massapequa, New York. This is included within our parking utilization study. In there, we, through the direction of the board's traffic engineer, took census tract information from all of those sites, car ownership ratios, transit availability of those sites, and compared them to this exact location to come up with that percentage reduction.
Okay. Is that what you needed?
I believe the traffic study, the counting was done during the summer months in June when they.
We actually asked them to do it twice. I was concerned because one of the first traffic study was done, I think, on a holiday weekend, if I recall correctly, and then we
This
had,
one was done in May. It was, I think,
or Memorial Day weekend,
It
right,
was
yeah.
earlier that week, and then we were asked to do it again in
Right.
June, which was, I think, June 25th or 26th, 2 days. Again, some of it was the fact of when these meetings were occurring.
Right.
We couldn't do it, the rest of the summer, obviously, and now we're here and school's back in session.
Right.
In light of the fact that some people go away during the summer, do you, the board, think that that is an accurate number, or do you think that the study has to be done a different time to reflect usage at different times of the year?
We've asked them, I was concerned when we did it in May because of, again, people be away. It wasn't an active period, but I think when they did it in late June, I think it kind of represented the, I guess, the traffic that takes place during the majority of the year. And I think we also had our traffic, our consultants look at that as well, and I think they were comfortable with that. No, am I correct? Is that correct?
We provided, yes, you are correct, Chair. We provided a response to both a traffic memo that was prepared by the consultants and a parking memo. And that's all public. We can provide it to you. We can provide both memos if you don't have it already.
All right. So as soon as we get any information, we'll share with all parties. All right, thank you, guys. So at this point, I'd like to call up, who am I calling up? 10 Fisher. Huh?
We had to approve meeting minutes from last month, Ray's asking me.
Oh, right, I don't remember that. Oh, shit. Yeah, you're right. We got to do that. Sorry. You're right.
No problem.
Yeah, remember. Thank you. Appreciate that, right. I'm glad somebody's awake.
Huh?
I'm glad somebody's awake.
No problem. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Leonard Brandis, representing Martine's Fine Bake Shop at 10 Fisher Avenue. I'm here with Yuval Galan, one of the owners, and his wife, Olga, to represent them. What we are preparing.
You brought the big guns tonight.
Right.
Okay.
Well, his sister really is the stronger one, but he's a better baker.
Good. Delicious baker. Good.
That gets me in trouble. What we have presenting is that we want to expand the back kitchen area of the facility right now that exists. It is over an existing basement area, so it's not additional footprint to the building itself. It's another 386 square feet for the kitchen area that we'll be cooking in. We've already gotten approvals for the front and changing the front of the space. We are increasing and enlarging the front of the building for the retail and sitting facilities.
The interior, not the building
Interior,
itself.
no,
Yeah,
the interior. And we're
Right.
changing the front facade, which we
Right.
have approval on that.
exactly.
And now we need to move back. And as we started working logistics, we're finding it's getting very difficult for the new kitchen facilities. We want to add new pieces that we don't want to have to close down for several weeks at a time.
Okay.
So this way, by expanding the kitchen right now, we can manipulate the things around, and also in the future now have an easier space to work in and make it a little easier. Even the staircase that goes up and down from the basement level that we have is very tight. We'll be expanding that as well, so it could be a more comfortable stair to be using. So in general, we're increasing the facility to make things better. The existing space that we're talking about is pulling in over the existing rooftop right here. So
This is in the back of the building, right?
in the back of the building,
Right.
over here. This building next to us on each side of us actually does come out further than where we are right now. So we're not going as far as that. We're still leaving about 8 feet in front on the rooftop itself, so that when we do get supplies, we can have the storage right there in front and not clog the roadway or the parking lot that's back in there. So this way we can still maintain easy flow for everybody. You can see the facilities here. This is the buildings coming out over here, and we're the black spot in there, in the middle there.
Is there anything on your right-hand side, Mr.
Over
Brandis?
here is the extending of the.
No. If I'm looking at the first photograph, upper left.
Over here?
Yeah, on the brown building.
This brown building
Yeah.
is the bar that's next to us. That does come
So
all the way
by
out.
by pulling your by extending the rear of your building, is it going to block anything on that side of the?
No, there is a space between that, and we're not blocking any of this.
There's no windows?
There is an area of maintenance that they can get through. They can still walk behind there.
Okay.
Yes,
I just want to make sure.
it's still open.
Okay.
Good question.
Thanks.
So as I was saying, we are basically just expanding the small area back here. The existing facility is now going to be pulled back. The original kitchen was up to here, so now we're pulling that back. So now we can have a full kitchen, maintain the kitchen itself.
Right. Anybody have any questions? Do you need an increase in parking?
Oh.
I'm kidding.
No more parking. We're not adding more people.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? All right. At this point, since no one has any questions, you have any questions, Mike? I'd like to make a motion to open the public hearing. Can I have a second, please?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Since there is no one here to speak on this application except the two owners, I make a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so at this point, I'd like to read a little something here. So Village of Tuckahoe, Planning Board Resolution, applicant owner Martine's Fine Bake Shop LLC. Location of the project is 10 Fisher Avenue, Tuckahoe, New York, Section 42, Block 9, Lot 12. Description of the project is the applicant is seeking to expand the existing kitchen area at the back of the first floor. The extension will be over an existing basement and add a total square footage of 386 square feet. SECRA resolution. Pursuant to the regulations of SECRA, this board finds that, 1, the action taken herein is an unlisted action subject to the requirements of SECRA and its implementing regulations. 2, the board is in possession of all information reasonably necessary to make the determination as to the environmental significance of the proposed site plan application. 3, that the action taken herein shall not have a significant adverse impact on the environment, and it's declared that a negative declaration is hereby adopted with regard to this action. So that's it, right? That's the second page as well?
Actually, you should take a vote on the
Yeah, okay, so, yeah, so,
Make a motion, we accept the secret motion.
can I have a second?
Second.
Second.
And Nancy, please take a roll.
Commissioner Narrator,
For,
Commissioner Ballard,
4.
Commissioner Fortier,
4.
Commissioner Castellano.
4.
In favor. So at this point, I'd like to read the following resolution. The following is a resolution of the Planning Board of the Village of Tuckahoe, New York. The applicant, Martine's Fine Bake Shop LLC, is seeking to construct a new addition to the kitchen area. The extension will expand the kitchen to an area over the existing basement. This board has entertained and approved a similar site plan for this applicant, where the applicant was seeking a larger expansion in the rear. Said prior approval has expired. We find that the applicant has met its burden as to 7-1 of the zoning code, and therefore the applicant is approved as submitted.
I make a motion, we accept the approval.
Second?
Second.
Nancy, please take the phone.
For,
4.
4
4.
in favor. Congratulations, and keep baking.
let me make a comment. I bought stuff in there 70 years ago when Pete the baker was there.
Guys,
So one housekeeping
Phones.
business before we close up. We have not approved the meeting minutes of September 17th. So at this point, I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes. Second, please.
second.
All in favor? Aye. Since we have no more business this evening, I make a motion to close the planning board meeting. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye, and good evening,
Aye.
Tuckahoe.